Thank you. Good morning, everyone. 안녕하세요. Who survived the first day? I'm very excited for this chat with Vitalik, and let's dive in.
Uh-huh.
I think I wanted to start actually as a continuation from this panel discussion we had yesterday, and there was a question you raised around that in general, abstraction can lead to disincentivization of security and decentralization. And I think related to the chat we're going to have today is similarly kind of where is this boundary lie between, kind of easy to use products that are run by centralized parties that, everybody kind of gravitates to and ends up, kind of stuck in this mode versus, something that potentially is right now at least more expensive, more complex to use. And like who should be the parties responsible to both promote the values but also deliver kind of the experience?
Yeah, I think this ties into a bigger question and I talked about this a bit in both one of my AI crypto posts and the post I wrote on DIAC a few months ago, which is basically a thing that I believe we need more of is we need more of sophisticated software whose goal and whose incentives are explicitly aligned with being on the user side and protecting the user, right? So basically think things like community notes, except instead of being part of Twitter, they're just part of the internet and they're just a browser feature, right? And within crypto, we're starting to see examples of things moving in that direction, right? So wallets, protect you against scams, things like Rabbi, have transaction simulation. And I think a big part of the responsibility for just helping users understand the difference between interacting with an insecure system and interacting with a secure system is going to have to fall on pieces of software that are like that. I think the big practical question is basically, one of them is just what is the business model for something like this going to be, and what are the incentives? How do we make sure that the incentives actually are fully aligned with the user instead of kind of being dragged off to the side and being aligned with one particular application that thinks that it's the secure one.
Well, maybe to add in general, right? What we see in Web 2 is that when company starts, right, they have probably user in mind because that's how they build a product, that's how they find product market fit. But then over time, as they kind of saturate their target market, right, they eventually need to move to extract more value out of a user, right? And that transition happens kind of, at some stage where they're pretty much now trying to grow their average revenue per user, and through that, starting to do things that are not really on user side, right? And, example of, for example, search and other products are very natural kind of evolution of that, where it starts with ads being a completely different department, huge wall, no search product, and data is actually going into that. And then over time, that wall is kind of crumbling down because, kind of they need to continue growing, they need to continue showing revenue growth. And so I think the challenge here, if we talk about any individual company, right, like a wallet, right now, yes, there is a growth of the target market. There is, kind of how to attract more users. But over time, they kind of, what prevents this transition to happen as well?
Right. And it could also actually mean a different kind of economic model for that kind of thing, right? So profit-making companies are one type of structure, and I think it's also important to remember that VC-backed companies in particular are only one type of profit-making company. There's entire classes of companies whose business models are just about directly serving customers from day one, right? Basically, no VC-backed funnel everything into rapid growth, take over the world phase, right? And then outside of the kind of traditional capitalist company approach, there's been things like cooperatives, and in the crypto space, we have DAOs. And one possible hope here is if you create a thing where users actually are owners in some sense, right? Or, users are beneficiaries and governors at the same time somehow, then you basically avoid creating this scenario where basically, users are the source of the money, but they're the source of none of the governance. And so, at some point they turn into cows.
Yeah, so maybe circling this back to AI, right? This is extremely important for AI because as these tools are becoming more intelligent, more powerful, they are able both to become a highly kind of proficient tool for manipulating people and extracting money out of them, but they also can serve on the user side and be kind of your defender against everybody else's, manipulation. And so maybe kind of switching more on AI safety kind of discussion, right? Kind of what is the, kind of exploring the idea of what is this I call it user-owned AI. What is this side where it sits on it's optimizing for your, right, loss function, not for somebody else's profit.
Yes. Yeah, I think AI itself is just such a big space, right? And so I think it's important to, think about different parts of it differently. One distinction that does seem likely to happen is you have small scale AIs, right? So you have basically anything that can realistically run on a phone or a laptop, for example, right? So for, things like that, I'm, super pro openness, super pro the thing, just running locally on your computer. I think it should serve you and, not even try to serve some other third party. And that's a kind of decentralization, right? And on the safety side, basically, if we do get to a super intelligence taking over the world, it's not going to be a thing on a person's laptop. It's going to be 5,000 H100s, right? And so the second part of this is more powerful AIs that realistically are too big for that. And for things like that, I think we want to explore some of these ideas around what does it mean for an AI to somehow be a community owned? What does that mean from a governance perspective, and what does that mean from a day-to-day perspective of where does the model live and who runs it, right? So both sort of what the rules are for how the thing should work in theory, who the thing should be serving in theory, should it be some utility function that's some combination of its users, and the practical question of where do the bits actually live, and can we make sure that where the bits live actually follows the rules of the whatever community governance thing you tried to set up originally.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important exploration. I think maybe to preface this with at least my belief is that there is no way to kind of contain, for example, some companies right now don't want open source because they think it's too risky, that somebody will, able to use it for malicious purposes. And from my perspective, at least, I think, well, first of all, none of those organizations running a military operation. There's no barbed wire around their offices. So it's not that hard to actually, if somebody malicious really wants to get the weights for the model, they can send a small private army. And it's actually cheaper than all the H100s. But I think that the reality is we should be expecting that people will have kind of pretty powerful AI capabilities to try to be nefarious. And so from one of the kind of safety perspectives from my is actually how do we AI proof our society and infrastructure such that we're able to live in a world where AIs are able to find zero-day vulnerabilities, for example, and are able to create infinite amount of kind of content that looks plausible. And I think this is where cryptography and blockchain and kind of these methods are extremely powerful. Community nodes, I've actually been talking about this. Yeah, I think we need to community node everything, as well as pretty much have hash of all the content stored and signed and have provenance and reputation for the data. And through that, leverage the kind of community to actually come together. What is the reputable sources of data and information, independently if it was created by AI or not.
Yeah, I mean, one of the distinctions that I made, again, in my DIAC post is a distinction between what I call cyber defense and what I call info defense, right? Basically, and the dividing line that I tried to make is essentially, is it the sort of thing where it's easy for like any reasonable person to, something with that's a little bit more subjective than a program, but not too subjective, to still agree, this is the attacker and this is the defender, right? So finding a DOS vulnerability in the EVM, for example, it's a little bit subjective because, there obviously a piece of code can't prove that it was a DOS vulnerability because, if it could, that piece of code would have just been part of the protocol. But on the other hand, pretty much anyone reasonable, including the Bitcoin maximalists, including the Solana people, including, the Liran Shapira and, any crypto hater would be able to come and agree, this is a DOS vulnerability, right? But on the other hand, if someone on Twitter goes and tells you if you have COVID, you should eat a pile of ivermectin, then is that true? Is that false? It's the sort of question where digging into that, there are getting to consensus is significantly harder, right? And I think we want different approaches to handle those two situations. And so for the first, one of the topics that I've been interested in is basically the question of can we, possibly even actually using AI, rapidly accelerate formal verification, right? AI can already write one-shot lines applications that have let's say between 100 and 500 lines of code, right? And then the question is well, can we get to the point where AI can write 100 to 500 line of code applications that come attached with proofs that prove that they follow some criteria that are reasonable for that type of application? And that's a place where we're not there yet. It's a place where you can see the space heating up because you see, excitement about mathematical theorem provers. There's a lean that Terry Tao has been excited about a lot recently. But actually doing that to code and really being ambitious and saying let's go all the way and let's see if we can actually prove that a ZK EVM is equivalent to some Ethereum implementation, right? If we could do things like that, right? If we can bring, or even if we can fix most bugs and let's say bring down the average rate of bugs from, I think the current one is about 15 per 1,000 lines of code to 0.15 per 1,000 lines of code, right? If the bug rate can drop to 0.15 per 1,000 lines of code, then there would be, I think, something like an 80% chance that the Geth EVM implementation would be bug-free, right? So that's one kind of DIAC that would be really cool to see. But this right now obviously it looks like a moonshot, but from the perspective of 2019, Sora looked like a moonshot. So let's see if.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we started Near AI as a program synthesis to do exactly this in 17, which did sound like a science fiction, but it doesn't anymore. So yeah, I totally agree. I think some interactive way to build a formal specification and then prove the code either is generated from it or correctly following it will be extremely important going forward, where you expect that these AI models are extremely good at finding vulnerabilities in code just because they've seen so many of them.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty funny that people thought that coding will be one of the last things that will be automated by AI, but it's actually the first, one of the first, because there's so much code on the internet and so there's so much training data. So many bug fixes are also committed to GitHub, so you can find all the common bugs and even less common in training data. And so these models are getting better and better at doing this.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Like, remember how 10 years ago, we were saying that, the mining is the physical mining is getting automated and people should learn the code. And now the code is getting automated and it's like the physical labor. That's the safer thing.
Yes. Yeah, like that's always funny because robotics actually is lagging because the dexterity of the hand is so much harder than, just producing characters. So, I guess that's probably a topic for another chat. So maybe you mentioned DAOs and governance, and this is a topic I'm kind of extremely been thinking a lot, and I've had this presentation at our NearCon last year, which I call AI President, and so the idea that I think we've seen with decentralized autonomous organizations, right, that they were not always decentralized, very not autonomous, and barely organized.
Yeah,
and the challenge there have been that you're trying to organize people to work together. And even if you have incentives aligned, you still have all the challenges of organization and you don't have any hierarchy. So the information propagation is very challenging and you don't have any kind of way of, enforcing performance and expectations because everybody just joins and leaves whenever they can. And so one of the kind of, direction to exploration is, can we leverage, LLM kind of AI model as a way to almost manage the people? Because compared to, a human manager who has like limitation of, maybe 7 to 8 people they can manage effectively, AI can pretty much provide context and answer questions to anyone kind of at infinite scale as you have compute. And you can have kind of all of the context and of the whole DAO available. But from your perspective, I'm curious. I mean, first of all, kind of how you see this evolving, but also what are the also risks that come out with this? Because obviously there's interesting, positive measures.
I mean, I think one important question to zoom in on here is like the question of open source, right? Because with like regular code, like open source is basically the only like good way to get security, right? And if something is not open, then how can you trust it? But with models, there's this problem of adversarial attacks, right? If you have access to a model, it's like very easy to train adversarial attacks against it, and like they get pretty crazy, right? For facial recognition, someone even figured out how to make masks. Like you can wear a mask and the mask makes you either not look like a person or potentially even look like a different person, right?
And I mean, for context, you take a model, you pretty much give the output you want, and then you run a backpropagation, which is a training algorithm for these models, and you see what are the inputs that you need to actually get this output. And you use that for jailbreaking LLMs. You use it for finding what is the way to trick the image models.
And so basically, the challenge is, right, if you have like a big blob of floating point numbers, or I guess these days it's 1.58-bit numbers that's controlling $1 billion corporation, then like, can someone download the blob and then locally run gradient descent to figure out how to make it give the attacker all of its money and then do that, right? So how do you protect against that?
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly the challenge. And I think this is kind of, from my perspective, some of the more just formal tools are required to surround the model to be able to actually make sure that the model's decision making is within a set of criteria that are predefined. But the other thing, we need to figure out also how to make these models more robust in general to reasoning. I think one of the real challenges is these models are really trained on just predicting next token. And so they're really good at just like switching context and kind of becoming in that, this model is, it's shown an article about, medicine here, it's shown a poem here, it's shown some code here. So it's really good at just like, okay, I don't know anything. Let me start from scratch and let's figure out what this document is. That's what they train for trillion tokens. And so, like, obviously that's not how we use them. We use them in a very specific scenario where you say, you are this actor, and I want you to do this job consistently. And for that, we only give it 10,000 examples.
Yeah.
And so part of it is also how do we kind of solidify that training more versus kind of being very easy that with one example, you can kind of unpack back all of that training and get back to switch context, run. So I think that's part of this is just the research on robustness of training and kind of fine tuning that needs to happen and a lot of people are working on that as well.
Right. I guess the big question is how optimistic are you that these digital LLM brains even can be managed to be secure in a world where anyone can look at their bits?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think within some set of kind of predefined structural criteria, I think we can make them secure, more secure at least, that, it's not that easy to just jailbreak them. We actually have right now a kind of mini example running on Near where it's called shill GPT. And so people are coming in and shilling the model to buy the other token. And so there's a motivation for people to do that. But what it does, it actually creates a training data for jailbreaks.
I see. Is the idea that you're basically making a bounty, and if you can get the LLM to say yes, you get the NFT or whatever?
Yeah, but that is actually a zero-sum game. We created a repetitive game around that. Somebody created a repetitive game around that where for example, you come and you convince it to sell one token over another. So it has a pool of tokens.
Oh, I see.
And it sells them back and forth. And so it continues creating training data with it's not a kind of in a self-fulfilling system.
That's fun. Okay.
Yeah. So I think there's, and maybe switching to kind of where AI and crypto meet, I think there's interesting ways we can incentivize both people and kind of, developers to create interesting networks and training data to really make these models more robust, make them reason better. And so, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit before, but kind of where do you see the immediate intersection, right, versus maybe things that are more long-term we discussed, right, like governance and safety?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the immediate intersection is things that don't require fancy cryptography or fancy formal stuff that we're not sure exists. So one very simple category is just AIs playing in on-chain games, right? So AIs participating in prediction markets was one example. Then AIs sort of being this agent that sits on behalf of a user and is part of a wallet as another one. Basically applications where AI is at the edges, because those are the applications where AIs can basically continue to run as is and don't need to be modified in some crazy way, and where the risks are the lowest. And then we should continue to do the research and see if we can figure out can we actually make a safe AI running a DAO, and what does that look like?
Yeah, and I think the benefit here that for the on-edge things, you don't, it's acting on behalf of some user. And so there's no problem of this misaligned incentives. But the benefit with blockchain we have is that we can create this kind of incentivized networks to incentivize some type of behavior. And even if it's not working right now, we're kind of running a gradient descent on the people now to find the right approach. So I guess, are there any other areas in AI that in the kind of crypto that you think are intersecting?
Yeah, and the concept of using DAOs, not just AIs to run DAOs, but DAOs to run AIs, in the sense of could we have a community somehow agreeing on what goes into the trading data, or what is the objective function that it's being optimized toward, or things like that.
Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting direction, because I had this talk in Denver where I have this diagram that shows all of the in the big companies, all the different teams that are involved in model building who are not engineers. right? There's legal team involved. There is, ethics and curation team, and all of this different impact on what you actually see.
Yeah.
This model's at the end just capturing bias from data, and it always will be biased. So that's just the world is biased. That's kind of how it works. And so the reality though is these models, in different regions for different communities are, people expect different things, and so being able to actually curate data as a community that you think should go into your model, and then leverage that, to train kind of, or fine tune at least your models for the community, I think is a really important direction, because it actually unlocks the current limitations of, everybody's pissed at one specific company for, doing things, and like, there always will be problems. Like it's just in the data, right? It's either one side or the other side. There's always a problem. So maybe looking kind of beyond, let's say we have, super powerful AGI that hopefully it's decentralized and community owned. We'll work on all of that. I guess, where do you see, the role of people in the world, as well as like how do we work together, like with AIs and AGI over time, and how do we build the future of that?
Yeah, I think there's like a nearer term answer to this and a longer term answer. And the nearer term answer that I'm enthusiastic about is basically like, instead of focusing on, building the silicon god, we focus the most on building tools that combine together like human creativity and human inputs with AI, and create like rapid feedback between the two, right? So like things that already exist are like, if you even just look at existing processes for using AI to make like images, or like increasingly it's audio and movies, right? Like it's not just a one-shot generation, right? Because one-shot generation gives you something impressive, but it's not going to give you the thing you want, right? You have to go back and forth and in Paint and do several loops. And doing that well is like step one. And then step two is basically seeing, like, can we try to make that connection even closer, right? So like brain-computer interfaces are one of those topics that I'm excited about for that reason, right? Basically, unlike ChatGPT, where you're talking to the bot every minute, can you provide at least a little bit of feedback to what the bot is doing? Like, let's say every 100 milliseconds, and then the longer term question is like where we go from there, right? And I think there's this dream that a lot of people have of like, can we merge with AI instead of AI completely replacing us, which is interesting, though it's also speculative. I'm not even sure if it's productive to go much beyond speculating at this point, because like if you tried to speculate about AI 10 years ago, you would not have predicted LLMs generally, right? It's like 10 years ago, it's like, we're supposed to be optimizing over mini-max and A-star and search algorithms, right? And now it's this totally different regime, and then 10 years ago we might have a totally different regime yet again, right? So I prefer talking about like high-level goals, right? And for me, the high-level goals are basically like, one is I want humanity to not get blown up, and two is I want humanity to not be permanently disempowered, right? Whether including by totalitarian government, and including by a world where basically like fully autonomous AIs just end up taking over and doing all the decision making, and we're basically just like end up sliding into like living inside of their zoo and we can't do anything, right? So whatever. I do think that there is a path that makes humanity stronger and avoids both of those, but I think we have to actively seek it.
Yeah, actually, I had a post, I don't even remember, in like 2012 or something, which was, we want augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And that was pretty much, talking to that. At the end, like, we as humans don't actually want a digital god. We want to make ourselves gods, right? We want to enhance our own intelligence, be able to, do more ourselves. And that's kind of all the machines and all the work we've done is to do that. And then in turn, as a society, we are kind of the new unit of intelligence, right? Because the society is the one who made all the inventions, right? Not any individual person. And I think like as we augment individual intelligence, right, the societal intelligence also kind of transcends that. I think there's a really interesting kind of reframing from like bringing a digital god to more of how do we enhance individual and community intelligence as well with these tools, and then as they kind of approach and advance, how do we make sure we are in control, we have the ownership, and we are kind of able to discern as well the reality from fiction and generated. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so instead of AI creating digital god and crypto creating digital dog, let's work together on making an open and collaborative world where humanity and each one of us will continue to be empowered over the next century.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.